Good morning. Welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Cincinnati. My name is Patty Kelly, and I will be your worship leader today. Located on the ancestral lands of the Adena, Hopewell, Miamia, and Shawnee peoples, our urban community welcomes all with love, supports learning and spiritual growth, serves our wider community, and works for justice, equity, and inclusion. We are glad you are here with us this morning, whether in person or virtually. During the service, you may hear mentions of programs or other items of interest. If you would like to learn more about these events, or if you have questions about our community or the Unitarian Universalist faith, please contact us at member-care@firstuu.com. We begin our time this morning by lighting our chalice, the chosen symbol of our faith, with these words by Sean Trapp. Our chalice reminds us that the fire within ourselves is the same fire that illuminates the universe. It is our reminder that all is connected, even though the space of the void is vast, and our experience here is but a blip in the cosmic timeline. This flame is our promise that in our smallness and our short time on this earth, that we live intently and deeply with love for one another, with honesty and integrity, to be guided by rational thought and critical thinking, and with a sense of shared responsibility. For, as the late astronomer Carl Sagan reminded us, this pale blue dot is the only home we've ever known. Now, please join us in our vision song. Now, please greet your neighbor in a manner that is comfortable to both of you.
May I gently call you back into your seats? I always feel so bad interrupting your greetings. When Samara Powers and I met to discuss today's service, she said that she likes to have the Time for All Ages match with the service theme. And I said, yes, good, I can do that. And then they said that they would like it if there could be an interactive element. And I said, oh, I know just the thing. So in just a moment, you're going to watch the Time for All Ages, after which we're going to hold a cherry blessing. And for those of you who are watching from somewhere else, I encourage you to take a moment and go grab cherries if you have them, and if not, a piece of fruit.
The cherry tree, based off of the tale The Almond Tree from Turkey. Talia's face was like a complicated map full of ridges and wrinkles. Her back was bent over, and when she walked, she shuffled. Still, she had a twinkle in her eye, and she always had a kind word for her neighbors, her children, her grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. She spent most of her days in her rocking chair, looking out over her garden. If she had a visitor, she'd share memories of the good old days. When she was alone, she remembered to herself. Now and then, she'd hum a little or wiggle her fingers. It was during one of those mornings alone that Talia surprised even herself by coming up with an ambitious plan. She made a phone call. A few hours later, when the doorbell rang, the delivery man was patient while she slowly shuffled her way to the door. She directed him to carry the very tall, skinny parcel he had brought to a bare corner of the garden. He kindly helped her find the garden spade and pull a lawn chair over. Then she paid him and waved him off. Slowly, very slowly, she dug a big hole in the ground. It was hard work. Now and then she'd sit on the lawn chair to take a break. But she got back up several times until, eventually, the hole was just the right size. Slowly, very slowly, she shuffled and rotated the bottom of the tall, skinny parcel into the hole. Kerplunk! She sat back down to inspect it and was satisfied. Slowly, very slowly, she began to push the dirt back into the hole all around the bottom of the parcel. That, too, was hard work. Over and again, she got tired. She sat down on the long chair to take a break. Then she got back up, and finally, she was finished. She unwrapped that tall, skinny parcel, and there it was. You've probably guessed. A beautiful sapling tree. She sat down once again to admire it. About then, her neighbor arrived home and poked her head over the fence. She looked alarmed and said, "Talia, you be careful. What are you doing? Planting a tree? Ridiculous. Someone your age?" "Is that a cherry tree? It won't produce cherries for years." Talia laughed as she pointed at a very old tree in the opposite corner of her garden. Some of its branches were broken right off. Others were bent with age. Most of them were bare, even though it was the middle of spring. She said, "I'm like that old cherry tree. My great-grandmother planted it. I loved to climb in it when I was a little girl. Its branches were broad and strong. I felt safe there. Then, when I was a young woman, I picked some of its delicious pink blossoms and decorated my hair with them. I think that's how my husband came to notice me." The neighbor began to smile. As usual, there was no stopping Talia or her story. "When I was a mother, I picked those cherries, cooked them to perfection, and served them to my family. When I was a grandmother, I rested in the shade of the cherry tree. Now, I'm a great-grandmother." Talia was looking very dreamy as she continued. "I have lots of time on my hands. I sit and remember as I look out my window. Mostly, I am happy with my life. But a little while ago, as I sat looking out into my garden, I realized that I had never planted a tree. Never. It just didn't seem right. I have great-grandchildren." "Great-grandchildren?" asked the neighbor. Talia exclaimed, "Yes! They need a cherry tree." "Of course," laughed the neighbor, as she pledged to herself to do something for her great-grandchildren too, even though she didn't yet have any. As for Talia, after planting the tree, she returned to her rocking chair to look out her window and smile. I wonder, what makes it difficult to take action that benefits the future?
Before we get to our cherry blessing, I just want to point out that our flowers for today are from the Flower Committee, donated in celebration of our new board members. And now I invite you to come forward and pick some cherries. Come on. Our blessing today is by Samara Powers, and it's called Cherry Blessing for the Fruiting of Lineage. Divine mystery within which we are planted, spirit of origins and possibilities, we receive this cherry as a blessing and reminder that life is both sour and sweet and brings us tender morsels to nourish us and delivers hidden stones to teach us. That the sweetness on our tongues is the reward for the hard work of our ancestors who planted for us the hard pits of their learning. And that we must rise to the challenges that reveal the tender seeds we are called to plant in turn. We are the fruit, the stone, and the seed. We are part of the lineage of root and sap and blossom. We offer our vulnerable selves to the fierce nature of the sky, sun, soil, and water. May we be nourished by the fruit. May we be open like the seedling. And may we blossom in the bounty and generosity of beloved community, so that the lineage of sweetness continues. If you have not already, feel free to eat your cherry. And I invite our children to join me outside our sanctuary for today's lesson.
Our Share the Plate collection for the month of July will go to the Intercommunity Justice and Peace Center, or IJPC. IJPC is an interfaith organization that works to combat racism, supports immigration rights, is working to end the death penalty, and promotes peace in our greater Cincinnati community. Giving to First Church is easy. You can text the word GIVE to 513-717-7373. If you have access to our Breeze member system, you may click Give Now, or you can give online at firstuu.com. You can also write a check to First Unitarian Church of Cincinnati and mail it to 536 Linton Street, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45219. If this is your first time with us, please let the virtual plate pass you by. Your presence is gift enough to our church. Thank you, Jera. I just have to say how fortunate we are to have her beautiful music enrich our services. Our speaker today is Samara Powers. Here's Samara in her own words. Samara Powers is a self-described generalist and aficionado of dad jokes and user of she and they pronouns. Her life experience ranges from theatrical training to hospitality to singing to a career in marketing and design and more. She is a single mom of 2 and a seminary student at Meadville Lombard Theological School. She is a non-binary, trans-positive, queer-positive relationship anarchist, a Best of the Net and Pushcart nominated poet, a writer, speaker, activist, anti-racist co-conspirator, priestess, jester, non-theist, embracer of learning, and seeker of the next better question. She co-houses with another single mom, also known as a platonic life partner, in Gainesville, Florida.
Good morning. My name is Samara or Samara, and I use she and they pronouns. If you're just listening in, then I am a tall, middle-aged, white female of European descent with my long blonde hair, very dark blonde hair, tied up in a messy bun on top of my head and held with sticks. I appear on screen sort of from the breastbone up, and my background is a very, very dark purple wall. We who live in the here and now, we exist at the pivot point between history and its often conflicted orientations and the future with all its unformed possibilities. We are at tension with what was and what can be. So it behooves us, as followers of a liberal faith tradition, to be mindful of our role in the lineage of that unfolding. To that end, I refer to your vision statement as a handy tool to help us deepen that mindfulness. It reads, "We will be a liberal religious haven, sustained by tradition, boldly seeking justice, gently transforming lives." It does everything a vision statement should do. It's inspiring, it encapsulates the essence of your ideals, and it's short enough for an elevator speech. And yet, in light of some of the research that I have done to learn more about you, and in light of my own expanding understanding of Unitarian Universalism, both as part of my congregational involvement and my seminary studies, I can't help but feel there is something missing from it, something left unsaid, unclaimed, that reflects within the microcosm of this congregation an endemic issue facing us all as moral agents subscribing to the Unitarian Universalist ethic. Let's begin. The first line, "We will be a liberal religious haven." It's that word haven that catches my attention. There are 2 definitions listed in Merriam-Webster, so I wonder which one we mean. Is what we offer a peaceful or pleasant area, or is it more shelter from danger? A haven can be a recharging station where we heal spiritual wounds, tend to and nurture each other, and reconnect to Source before getting back out into the world for some really wonderful meaning-making and justice. Or it can be a place where the weekend worshiper enjoys the niceties of a peaceful and pleasant area as a passive consumer of church, enjoying the spiritual equivalent of a spa day. Now, I have nothing against spa days. They too can be wonderfully healing and restorative in their place. But a liberal faith that is not striving urgently and prophetically toward a rectifying justice is a faith that is merely liberal with itself. Are you familiar with the slang term woke? It means ethical or social enlightenment. If you'll forgive the ableist reference, I think a lot of us UUs are doing something I call woke walking. We drift in a limbo state between woke and asleep because we have all the right tools and values to co-create a just world, but many of us only end up tinkering with them on the weekends. We are not strangers to inequity, and many of us may have experienced some form of it in our own lives, and many of us may even be answering the deepest of the prophetic calls to justice. And yet, by and large, it seems that most of us unknowingly cultivate this semi-lucid bubble of privilege and comfort that keeps out the full breadth of the violence and the horror of systemic oppression. How does the saying go? If you're not outraged, then you're not paying attention. As UUs, and let's be real, most of us exist in social locations of immense privilege. We allow that attention to drift. In the New Testament's letter of James, chapter 2, verse 18, it reads, "I by my works will show you my faith." We as UUs must discern through courageous self-reflection what kind of haven we mean. Because without that critical self-understanding, our faith may become a solitary practice, and our works may miss the mark of what is needed most in a hurting world. The next line, sustained by tradition. Tradition can be a tricky word for UUs because our history, like many faith traditions, is checkered at best. The word tradition calls to my mind a set of actions informed by the way things have been done before. It speaks to the value of continuance. The origins of Unitarian Universalism, like the origins of the United States, are fraught with contradiction and unexamined conflicting biases. This means we as UUs may find ourselves on the horns of that history where tradition can be life-affirming or life-limiting, depending on which ones we choose to sustain us. Do we choose the effete intellectualism, connected only to the struggles of oppression as an abstraction, something happening out there? Or do we choose the prophetic and challenging traditions of the likes of the transcendentalists and the abolitionists? Something else? My introduction to your congregation was in the essay Reconciliation with the Carter Family by Reverend Sharon Dittmar. It was in the book Darkening the Doorways, Black Trailblazers and Missed Opportunities in Unitarian Universalism, a collection of essays edited by the inestimable Reverend Mark Morrison Reed. I made a single mark with my highlighter on page 1 of Reverend Sharon's words. Otherwise, I would have run out of ink highlighting every line. Reading it moved me to tears. It inspired me. It impressed upon me the value of the prophetic in my own ministerial formation. When I met Reverend Connie this past April, I felt a flutter of excitement in my stomach when I learned she was serving a Cincinnati congregation, and I wondered if it was the same one from my reading. It was. You are. Or at least you were. Just as quickly as my wondering was confirmed, I also learned that Reverend Connie was leaving this congregation much sooner than expected. I kept trying to reconcile how a congregation capable of such profound healing work as the Carter Family Reconciliation would now be navigating the unexpectedly early departure of such a deeply prophetic minister. I knew I needed to learn more. I read your website. I asked Reverend Connie about you, and she described you with a warmth tinged with the certainty and regret that your respective ministries no longer aligned. I expect this parting will be a painful one for many. I reached out to your Director of Lifespan Faith Development, and Meredith was kind enough to point me toward Tim Krause's recent talk about your history called It's in Our DNA. That was a great talk. It was there I learned that the prophetic abolitionist minister William Henry Channing had left this congregation under similar circumstances in the mid-19th century. A pattern began to emerge, and the seemingly irreconcilable facts began to make sense, both for your congregation and for Unitarian Universalism in general. A few relevant quotes from Mr. Krause's message. They wanted to be on the right side of history, but they were torn by their social status. What we didn't bargain for was that Channing might actually ask us to put our beliefs into practice and live out our faith. Channing left because, as a committed abolitionist, he knew he was very far away from the social and theological values of the leading members of our congregation. He understood that he was generally loved and revered by almost everybody, and they all wanted him to stay, but he knew that just a few prominent people in the church could easily destroy him and his ministry. I've been watching some of your recent services. Y'all are getting the crash course on prophetic Unitarian Universalism, aren't you? Our shared UU history is fraught with this very same challenge. In this struggle, beloveds, you're not even that special. It's in all our DNA. Eighth Principle co-author Bruce Pollock Johnson noted in another of your recent services that there is an essential contradiction baked into the origins of Unitarianism and Universalism. For example, within the Washington congregation that Mr. Krause mentioned, the one founded by two friends, one an abolitionist, the other an owner of enslaved people. They, quote, agreed that a discussion of slavery would be forbidden in order to preserve the internal peace of their church. The peace they preserved was really a form of comfort and privilege. They made the conscious choice not to talk about a hot-button issue so they could go about the business of preserving their peace. They collectively turned away from the prophetic to preserve their unity, or at least the appearance of it. Now, I will happily admit that there is deep wisdom in being willing and able to compromise to build community, but unless there is a commitment to come into right relationship at some point, unless that compromise is consensual, above board, and the consequences fully and mindfully recognized, then it is only an illusion of peace that is being created. It's stasis. It's limbo. It's the limbo in which those people who can personally afford to do so forestall the hard work of justice. But it is only a forestalling, because the deepest truths will always out. Neglecting justice in the now merely leaves the problem for our descendants, who may in fact choose to leave the problem for their descendants, thus establishing a tradition of silent complicity. In our process of seeking sustenance from our traditions, I hope we recognize that our values require us to become more than passive receivers and sustainers of tradition. Our values call us to be engaged and educated connoisseurs of it. May we all become selective admirers of fine vintages of courage and delectable varietals of justice-seeking and meaning-making. As free-thinking moral agents, we get to choose which traditions to adopt and which to let go of. In our efforts to live more deeply into our values, we get to choose. Choosing well may require some of us who have not done so yet to become more acquainted with the discomfiting aspects of peace building. It takes courage, discernment, resolve, and hard conversations, and healthy boundaries, and a beloved community informed by resilient compassion. And this too is in our collective DNA. The next line, boldly seeking justice, and yes, we were only halfway through. Justice comes in many forms, and you are clearly committed to an ethic of social justice. Your activities in the region with literacy and collaboration and addressing the crises of the unhoused are earnest and commendable. And I must also ask, what does it mean to be bold? What does it mean to seek justice? Is justice something like a Platonic ideal that we will find somehow robust and whole and fully formed if we simply look long enough? I suggest instead that a just world is something that is not found, but built, piece by piece, with time and patience, with sweat and muscle and the courageous labor of shared ministry. When a minister comes into a congregation to be settled, it's founded on the understanding that the respective ministries of the congregation and the minister are in alignment. And when you have prophetic justice in your DNA, which you do, and you call a prophetic minister like Reverend Connie, which you did, you are going to be directed toward prophetic action. The book Injustice and the Care of Souls contains an essay called The Time of No Room by Reverend Kenneth Leach, who was active in justice work for the unhoused in the UK. He wrote, quote, "The struggle with the regions of death and slavery, of oppression in captivity, is often described as the prophetic dimension in pastoral ministry. But prophecy is not a dimension, rather one description of the whole nature of ministry. If this prophetic sense is lost, we may minister to the homeless, bind up wounds, feed the hungry, cope with crises, but never engage the system, never confront the powers, never challenge the way things are." Without the prophetic element, we UUs are guaranteeing that we will always have wounds to bind because we did not address and remove the sources of violence. We will always have homeless to succor because we neglected to call out the causes of housing and economic injustice. Failing to address the prophetic is, in fact, job security for humanitarians. Your ministries can continue forever. Meanwhile, tragedies like that in Buffalo, New York, are part of the cost of that compromise for preserving the internal peace of the church. You had William Henry Channing. You had Reverend Sharon Ditmar's healing ministry. You had Pauline Warfield Lewis as the first African-American DRE in 1956 in this congregation, and you had Bill Sinkford and probably many others whose names I did not find on the history page of your website. You, like most UUs, have in your DNA both a deeply engaged liberative ethic and distrustful shying away from the challenge and call of prophetic collaboration. Which do we choose today? Tomorrow? The next day? And the last line, gently transforming lives. Transformation is necessary, absolutely. And yet liberative transformation is rarely gentle with us. Take childbirth, for example, or the grueling work of healing from trauma. Venture out into the fraught and vulnerable territory of an abortion rights protest or a shelter for those fleeing domestic violence, and tell me what gentle means there. In all this talk of history and DNA and transformation and tradition, I am wondering how we as Unitarian Universalists understand ourselves as ancestors. How will our great, great, great grand congregants understand the culture and ethic we are embodying today? What will they learn from us? What gifts and challenges will be wrought by our legacy? And as you ask yourself these questions, are you satisfied with the answers? I offer this for your consideration, and beloveds, I offer it with the urgent desire for you to awaken to the history that is waiting like the stone at the center of the cherry for you to crack open, freeing the vulnerable but fertile seed inside, that it may grow into something vibrant and juicy and delicious for our descendants. We as Unitarian Universalists are powered, poised, and principled to nurture a prophetic groundswell of liberation. I only wonder if we will. For this congregation, the history that could have been made with Reverend Connie is lost to you now. I hope you will allow yourselves to feel the depth of that loss. And I hope you will allow your lament to galvanize you to just purpose, so that you do not miss the next opportunity to make history, because there will be another opportunity. But when we claim the right to grow and learn, we clear the way for our descendants to learn the next lesson, and for their descendants to learn the next lesson after that. And in this protracted and gorgeous and muscular and heartfelt and often uncertain process, we bend the long moral arc of the universe toward justice. We have a Unitarian minister to thank for those words, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who made them famous. They too shaped our lineage. We have so much work to do and so much to learn, but that is the good news. It means we are alive. It means that while we are alive, there is a chance for us to live more deeply into the challenge and the charge of Unitarian Universalist values, which require us to be relentless in our commitment to challenging the way things are. We will all make mistakes. The great green goddess knows that I have made many, and I will definitely make more. So will you. But we most honor our history when we learn from it and do better next time. To be on the horns of history is to be at the crossroads of choice, where every moment is an act of creation, with all of the blessings and the challenges and the responsibilities of choosing how we are to be in this moment and whom we are willing to become. Which of your traditions will you choose to sustain you? What bold new ways of co-creating justice will you not just search for, but embody? And will you choose to answer the next prophetic call and dig anew into the courageous and worthy work of collective liberation where it counts? Right here, right now. Like the cherry pit, we must break open our own hearts to access our most fertile, nurturing compassion. May we learn to forgive the bitterness in our history, even as we taste and are nourished by the sweetness afforded by our ancestors' best works. And may we always find the courage to crack ourselves open to prophetic purpose for the sake of our descendants, so that the lineage of justice may bloom. May it be so, beloveds. Amen. Ashe. And blessed be coming to us all.
Now we are going to join together in a hymn that is essentially a responsive reading. Please turn to page 1037, 1037 in the teal hymnal. We start with a refrain sung together, and then I will read lines that you will then respond to with this same refrain. You may remain seated as we pay attention to what we're singing and hearing. So let's start by practicing the refrain. Give ourselves and each other, we begin again in love. For each time that our fears have made us rigid and inaccessible, we forgive ourselves and each other, we begin again in love. For each time we have struck out in anger without just cause, we forgive ourselves and each other, we begin again in love. For each time that our greed has blinded us to the needs of others, and each other, we begin again in love. For the selfishness that set us apart and alone, and each other, we begin again in love. For falling short of the admonitions of the Spirit, we begin again in love. For losing sight of our unity, we begin again in love. For those and for so many acts, both evident and subtle, which have fueled the illusion of separateness, we forgive ourselves and each other, we begin again in love. Now we close our service with these words from Maureen Killeran, inspired by the writing of the Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker. No matter how weak or how frightened we may feel, we each have gifts that can make a difference in the world. In this coming week, may you do at least one thing to support the broken, to welcome the stranger, to celebrate what is worthy, to do the work of justice and love. Be strong, be connected. Each day, act, so you may be a little more whole. We will extinguish our chalice by saying these words together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.